You're listening to Talk by Turner.
I'm Jeffrey Colon. This is Talk by Turner. Talk by Turner dives deep into the intellectual discovery while examining what's happening in our world right here, right now. With topics ranging from screenwriting and modern dating to climate politics and how horror stories impact culture. Talk is for everyone. Whether you're new to something or you want to hear more about a subject you've always loved. Join us each week to hear from published authors and industry experts as they share their knowledge and insight. Now let's check out who's on this week's episode. Chelsea, welcome to Talk.
Jeffrey, I'm ready to talk.
All right, so almost 2/3 of Americans are concerned about climate change and or global warming, according to a recent Gallup poll. I have to ask you this. Why is there still so much pushback on Capitol Hill when it comes to climate change, when you think about the fact that Americans are pretty united on this front?
Yeah. I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? But I think one thing that you see if you look through history is that lawmakers don't lead, right? They follow what they're hearing from their constituents and what the demand from their constituents is telling them to do. And then layer on top of that, they're also following what their donors and contributors to their campaigns want them to do. And so, I mean, honestly, until the people's voice can be stronger than oil and gas interests that are funding campaigns, those voices, then we are going to be stuck in this situation.
Now, you've worked in D.C. for years, which we spoke about. How does the current political environment differ from previous eras? I'm sure this is a tough one to answer.
Yeah.
But what are the challenges?
Bleak. It's pretty bleak. So, listeners, obviously, we just elected President Trump to the White House. And this is not a diss historically on Republicans. If you go back, the issue of climate change really kind of hit some politicians anyway, not all of them, but some started to focus on this in the 70s. So Richard Nixon was potentially briefed on climate change. His top advisors were talking about it. And Nixon's also the father of many of our environmental statutes, signed those into law, created the Environmental Protection Agency. The president following him, President Ford, is the one who oversaw fuel economy standards. So this is the federal requirement that your car gets a certain number of miles per gallon of gas. He did not do it because he was a great tree hugger trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. He did it because we were in an oil crisis, and he thought we can really stick it to OPEC. If we can go farther on a gallon of gas, it protects us, it gives us a little more energy independence. Fast forward, Reagan oversaw the removal of chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, from the atmosphere, which were thinning the ozone layer. That's a very potent greenhouse gas that has been phased out internationally, globally. And George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, when he ran for president in 1988, said, I'm going to be the greenhouse effect president. He was the one that was going to solve this crisis. 92, obviously, he ran against Clinton. Clinton won. 96, Bob Dole ran against Clinton. Bob Dole thought climate change was real. 2000, George W. Bush, I mean, you see where this is going.
Yep.
Romney in 2012, or John McCain in 2008 running against Obama. And I was on Capitol Hill at that time. And I remember I had this big bill that was on the Senate floor, the first major climate change bill to get through committee and have Senate debate. And when we lost, we thought, it's sad, it's a bummer, right? But whoever is president next, Clinton, Obama, or Bush, because all three were, the Democratic primary hadn't concluded yet who was going to run. McCain. Obama, Clinton, McCain, a climate champion is going to be in the White House. Obama won, faced Romney in 2012. Romney oversaw, signed into law, the first statewide global warming bill as governor of Massachusetts. So it really wasn't until 2016, when President Trump was the nominee, that we had a GOP nominee who denied climate change. And now he's again back in the Oval Office and taken his, slash and burn approach to all federal agencies that touch climate change.
And one of those, Trump withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, what's the impact of that for listeners to understand?
So I actually think that the Paris Climate Agreement, because the countries that are parties to Paris they aren't mandatory cuts, right? They're committing to making a certain level of cuts of greenhouse gas. There's no enforcement mechanism with Paris. It's more optics. It's a bad look. The US is historically the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Currently, China is the top emitter. We're second. But historically, if you look at all the past years of emissions data, we're still number one. And we're a global leader in so many realms, right? So as one of my old bosses used to say, why are we waiting? Why are we going to wait around for other countries to take the lead? We are the global leaders. So I think it's a real vacuum of leadership, and it just sends a really bad signal.
We can learn a lot from history. You've obviously cited, historical timelines here in terms of how we've, moved as a country when it comes to looking at climate change. My question is, if Trump rescinds many of these federal environmental rules, what can we look forward to or not look forward to as a result of that? If we look at sort of history, like let's just say, let's backtrack before Nixon. What was it like for the country, for listeners and viewers to understand then?
I mean, rivers were on fire, right? In the pre-Nixon days, we were dumping chemicals into rivers. We didn't have any environmental regulations. People threw trash out of their car windows, which I think they still do. We weren't seeing the climate impact. So to sort of take that context and put it in today's terms, if everything that is envisioned in Project 2025, in which Trump is sort of indicating he's going to lean into, happens, what we could potentially see is a state like Florida or Louisiana, any of those Gulf states, Texas, major Category 5 hurricane, which now happen more frequently and with greater intensity than they used to because of conditions caused by climate change. It used to be that the scientists, when Katrina hit, the climate scientists were like, we cannot say Hurricane Katrina was caused by climate change. Now they can. Now they can say the conditions of climate change have caused, whether it's the ocean temperature to increase or the shift in the winds or whatever, now they can directly connect the dots. So potential big catastrophic hurricane hitting one of these high population, high density states with maybe no FEMA, because Trump is taking an axe to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which goes in and provides relief. And is there maybe some fraud and abuse in FEMA that could be dealt with? Sure. But to just 86 an entire industry, and then to take another policy he's working on, he's deporting a great percentage of the construction industry. So you're going to have no one around to rebuild these places. So that it's like that kind of doomsday scenario that is not actually that far out of the realm of possibility that I think we might see happen in the next couple of years.
Climate change, global warming conversations, they usually are with people who are close to us, friends, family. We all have these discussions, especially when we gather together around holidays. Yeah. What advice would you give to someone on, how they should approach a conversation with someone who's hesitant to even accept climate change?
Yeah. That's a really good question, Jeffrey. And it's something that Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist and also comes from an evangelical background, is married to an evangelical preacher, likes to talk about a lot, because she says, and this is her perspective as a climate scientist, the most important thing that you can do, it's not don't take an airplane flight or buy an EV or get solar panels. It's talk to somebody. Talk about climate change. But you have to talk to people in a way where you connect a shared interest. And so, for example, I'm not evangelical. It would not make sense for me to try to have a conversation with an evangelical about the sort of faith-based reasons to want to solve climate change. So finding out what you have in common can really be a good way. Maybe like if you're at a family gathering and you were from New England, say, maybe ice fishing is something that you used to do with your grandfather or, whatever family member, and you can't ice fish anymore because the lakes aren't getting cold enough to freeze. So like kind of finding that really personal connection, that personal anecdote, and connecting it to what is happening on the greater scale is something that we see as being really effective. And then the economic case. People think still of climate change as being an environmental issue. It is an economic issue. It's costing us money when we have to respond to natural disasters. Some of the states that are on the front lines of climate impacts, the home insurers are pulling out of those states. If you can't get home insurance, you can't buy a home. Or the one that you live in might be suddenly unaffordable if your insurance rates go up 500%. So there are real economic impacts to climate change too.
Let's talk about the pivot toward generational sort of outlook or philosophy.
Yeah.
So Generation Z, millennials, they've been pretty outspoken about pushing for climate change solutions specifically to government. How do you interpret this trend, and how will that make an impact on where we are right now?
A great impact, honestly. And I'm the mom of two Gen Zers. So I saw when they were in not just high school, but, elementary school, middle school, in their science classes, they were learning about the greenhouse effect. They were learning about climate change and sort of at increasingly, more complex levels as they got older and your class, science class gets a little harder. And so we think of these generations as being climate native. They've been hearing about the issue and learning about it in school, but they are also seeing events. These are no longer isolated events. So they're seeing the hurricanes, they're seeing wildfires, they're here. If they aren't experiencing them, they're reading about them, they're hearing them, they might be seeing them on TikTok. And that's going to have a really big impact because it doesn't matter, Gen Z, whatever political party they are, 80% of them not only accept climate science, but believe the federal government has a role to play in solving it. And so those people that generation is going to be talking to their lawmakers and pushing them to be the leaders.
So for individuals concerned with, the current presidential and congressional policies on climate change, beyond just telling them to discuss it, what are other action steps that they could do? What's a big power action that they could take?
In my own life, during the first President Trump term, I really tried to shift my personal actions more locally because it's a lot easier to feel engaged at the local level and to see results. So working in my town, what sort of pro-climate policies can we be talking about at that town level or even at the state level? And honestly, even if your members of Congress at the federal level, your senators or whatever, agree with your position, still call them and leave them a little message. You can say no need to write back, but just weigh in so that they know you're still thinking about that issue and that you care. So I think kind of that is a spectrum of things, but listen, we can't all do everything, right? And it is such a global issue and it is really hard sometimes to think, what is my part in it? I'm going to just pitch another book right now, and that is one that my friend wrote called One Green Thing. And in One Green Thing, what Heather White, the author, does is she helps you identify what your climate superpower is, and then gives real examples of things you could do within that superpower to make a difference. And I think that that is really helpful, finding out, philanthropy, I do not have deep pocketbooks. So philanthropy isn't going to be my thing, but maybe I'm a spark. Maybe I'm the person that's going to go in my community and light a fire under my local lawmakers. So kind of figuring out who you are and what your role is, I think makes you able to find the sort of more manageable bites.
Is there a democratic country you believe is setting the standard for climate change policies? And if so, which one?
Well, I mean, the European Union is definitely, they have filled some of the vacuum left by the United States. They don't have the same level of emissions that we do, but they have, as a unit, so not any one particular country within there, but they've really tried to come together to reduce emissions. Individually, some of those countries have made some kind of boneheaded decisions. Germany withdrew its plans to build more nuclear energy and then ended up being beholden to natural gas from Russia. So now they're seeing kind of a geopolitical issue with that with Russia involved in the war in Ukraine. So, individually, some countries still are, trying to find their way like we are. But I think the EU is a good example.
Why'd she decide to write the book Glacial? I mean, obviously, it's a big task to write a book, but, what empowered you to write?
I am actually a fiction writer at heart, so stay tuned because there may be something from me in that realm in the future. And I had been, tinkering with stories for years, and really it was talking to my dad. He was like, "You should write a nonfiction book." And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what I would write about. And one day on the phone, he started to ask me all these questions about climate change and why we didn't have a climate bill passed yet or enacted into law, like a national climate program. And I was sort of thinking at the time, wow, he really doesn't listen to me when I talk at Thanksgiving dinner because he should know the answer to all these questions. I talk about it all the time. And then I don't know, I just started thinking, like, wrote everything down that I knew and realized how much I knew. And my dad was like, there's your outline for your book. Like, this is what you should be focused on. And it was like this aha moment. So thank you, Dad.
Chelsea Henderson, her book Glacial is out now. You should check it out. Chelsea, where can listeners find you online?
Yeah, so I'm taking a little pause from social media, but I haven't canceled my accounts. I am on Instagram at ChelseaH_writes. So, get it, haha, writes, WRITES. I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a website, chelseahendersonbooks.com.
Chelsea Henderson, author of the book Glacial. It's out now. You can find it at turnerpublishing.com. Thanks for joining us on Talk by Turner.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Talk by Turner. Make sure to check out more at turnerpublishing.com. Talk highlights authors from Turner Publishing's catalog of thousands of books to drive important conversations that are relevant to our current culture. Talk is about more than just books. It's about giving new audiences a seat at the table alongside expert writers as we navigate an increasingly changeable and uncertain world. By exploring a wide range of topics in the context of everyday life and politics, Talk is your go-to podcast for discovery and discussion. Talk by Turner, hosted by Jeffrey Colon. Watch and listen now wherever you enjoy podcasts.